Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. This is a particularly important one as we will be covering classical Athens and classical Sparta. So if you are watching these episodes in order, we're going back in time a little bit. We had almost passed by Athens and Sparta, but some might not even consider them empires because they're relatively, in terms of geographical extent, in terms of population, a little bit smaller than some of the empires we have been covering. However, in terms of their innovation, in terms of governance, and in terms of their significance, in terms of wars and such, I don't think we could have neglected them. So, if this is perhaps the only episode you have watched, welcome and thank you for tuning in. So, as well, in terms of the structure, for each empire, we will delve into the rise and fall of the empire to sort of learn about how civilizations today might succeed and fail. And as well, we will highlight a leader from each empire. In this episode, from Athens, we will highlight Pisistratus, and from Sparta, we will highlight Leonidas I. So I have a previous series titled Ancient Greek and Roman History, so where I covered all Plutarch's parallel lives, so there are many important Athenian and Spartan leaders such as Lycurgus or Solon, etc. Pericles as well is a very famous one. Alcibiades is one of my favorites as well. But nonetheless, so I wanted to highlight two leaders that are not already in that series. So we came across Pisistratus, who's a very important tyrant, who perhaps maybe you might not agree with his ways, but nonetheless he was very significant. And Leonidas I, who is maybe a bit more commonly famous because he was featured in the movie 300, for example. He was the one who led the 300 soldiers in Sparta against the Persians. So he's quite famous, but he was not highlighted in Plutarch's parallel lives. So I personally have not covered him. So that's how I came to choose these two leaders. And at the very end, we will have a comparison in the style of Plutarch's parallel lives between Pisistratus and Leonidas I to learn a little bit more about their characters and their respective empires. So I hope you enjoy. So starting with Athens, so the city of Athens, also as we have named after Athena, it could be called, or more commonly and singularly known as Athens. It's during the classical period of ancient Greece, lasted from about 508 to 322 BCE. It was a major urban center of the notable polis, which means city in Greek, or city-state, of the same name, that is Athens, located in Attica, Greece. And it, for a time, led the Delian League in the Peloponnesian War against Sparta, which we will cover in detail, and is highlighted in a great book titled The History of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. So that is another great book I recommend, but that will focus just on this war. And it's one of the earliest pieces of history, alongside Herodotus, for example, and also was involved in the Peloponnesian League. Athenian democracy was established in 508 BCE under Cleisthenes, following the tyranny of Isagoras. The system remained remarkably stable, and with few brief interruptions remained in place for 180 years until 322 after the Lamian War. The peak of the Athenian hegemony was achieved in the 440s to 430s BCE, known as the Age of Pericles, who's highlighted in Plutarch's parallel lives, one of the great leaders of all times, one of the great orators as well, supposedly. In the classical period, Athens was a center for arts, learning, and philosophy, home of Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum. Athens was also the birthplace of Socrates, who inspired Plato. Plato's Republic, for example, which I have read, is the dialogues of Socrates written by Plato. Pericles as well, Aristophanes and Sophocles, and many other prominent philosophers who you likely know. Some of them we also covered in the History of Leaders of Thought series too, such as Thales. But I don't believe Thales was necessarily from Athens, but nonetheless, he is a great ancient Greek philosopher, one of the first of the 7 sages. But Aristotle does reference him much, and he might actually even have been from Athens, but this would have been before the period we're discussing here. It is widely referred to as the cradle of Western civilization and the birthplace of democracy, largely due to the impact of its cultural and political achievements during the 5th and 4th centuries BCE on the rest of the then known European continent. So as for the history of the rise and fall, so the history of Athens is rich and complex, spanning several centuries. And therefore, we seek to find an overview of the rise and fall of this Athenian empire, focusing primarily on the classical period, which is often considered its zenith. So Athens is still a city now. You can go visit it. I've been fortunate to visit. It's still a very beautiful city, but we wouldn't necessarily call it an empire today. Or some might not even have considered Athens an empire to begin with, but I think during the Delian League, for example, it would be definitively an empire. But nonetheless, as we'll see, it's slightly smaller than many of the other empires we have covered so far, and will continue to do so. So starting with the rise of Athens. Early history. Athens, located in the region of Attica, has a history dating back to the Mycenaean civilization. However, it rose to prominence during the Archaic period, so from 800 up until 500 BCE was sort of its development stage during the Archaic period. As for the reforms of Solon, Solon is a great life covered in Plutarch's Parallel Lives, one of the earliest ones, paired with Poplicola of ancient Rome. Circa 594 BCE. Solon, an Athenian statesman, enacted significant political and economic reforms, including canceling debts and freeing those who had become enslaved due to debt. These reforms laid the groundwork for the development of the Athenian democracy, an important early lawmaker. As for Pisistratus and his sons, we will cover Pisistratus specifically in a biography soon, circa 560 to 510 BCE. Pisistratus, a tyrant, seized power and ruled Athens, implementing various public works and projects. His sons Hippias and Hipparchus continued his legacy of tyranny, sort of leading up into the democracy of ancient Athens. As for Cleisthenes, democratic reforms circa 508 BCE, and this is where we can mark probably the start of at least the democratic Athens, from 508 to 507 BCE. Cleisthenes introduced radical political reforms, establishing the foundations of the Athenian democracy. He reorganized the political divisions, allowing citizens more direct participation in government, named after Democritus, who hypothesized a system similar to molecules. So thinking of democracy as many different parts. As for the golden age of Athens, Themistocles and the Persian Wars. Themistocles is another great life covered in Plutarch's Lives and in our ancient Greek and Roman series. So from 499 to 479 BCE. Athens played a crucial role in the Persian Wars, with Themistocles leading the Athenian fleet to victory at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE. As for the Delian League and the Athenian Empire, Athens formed the Delian League, a naval alliance against Persia, which eventually evolved into an Athenian-dominated empire, and an empire, making it worthy of this series. The wealth of the league was kept in Athens, however, financing grand building projects, including the construction of the Parthenon and the Acropolis. So they had this huge area of land, area of water, because they covered all the coastlines, but they would collect tributes from the other cities, and most of the wealth would come into Athens. There was more benefit for the city-state capital than some of the outlying regions, hence sometimes there were revolts. As for Pericles' leadership, 461 to 429 BCE, Pericles, an influential statesman, led Athens during its golden age. He promoted democracy, the arts, and infrastructure projects. The period saw the flourishing of philosophy, including Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and the drama epics such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. So there's you might not like him, or you might like him. Boris Johnson, who's one fascinated in the classics, at one point said he was the reincarnation of Pericles. So just somebody who really admires Pericles. I don't think he meant that literally, and I might have even misquoted that, but nonetheless, he's a Pericles fan. As for the fall of Athens, starting with the Peloponnesian War. So for further detail of this, highly recommend The History of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. It's just such a great read. Imagine these battles on these boat battles, land battles, and they stop for lunch and stuff. It's great. It's amazing how old it is, and it still reads with such finesse. So the Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BCE. Athens engaged in a protracted conflict with Sparta and its allies. Thucydides says it was the rise of Athens that caused the inevitability of the war, and there's modern scholars suggest there might be something similar as someone takes first place from the United States, known as the Peloponnesian War. Plague, military defeats, and internal strife weakened Athens. The war ended with the defeat of Athens in 404 BCE, leading to its surrender to Sparta. As for Spartan rule and decline, from 404 to 403 BCE, after the Peloponnesian War, Athens experienced a brief period of Spartan rule. However, due to various internal conflicts and revolts, Spartan hegemony was short-lived. As for Theban and Macedonian domination, so the Spartans did ultimately win the Peloponnesian War, but then they sort of declined themselves. Then came the Thebes and Macedonians. We covered the Macedonian Empire in the 4th century BCE. Athens faced further challenges under Theban and Macedonian rule. The rise of Philip II of Macedon and his son Alexander the Great marked the end of the city-state era in Greece. As for the Hellenistic period and Roman conquest, Athens entered the Hellenistic period marked by the influence of Hellenistic kingdoms. Eventually, Athens came under Roman control in the 2nd century BCE. Thus, Athens rose to prominence through its democratic reforms, military victories, and cultural achievements during its golden age, and probably most primarily its naval domination. However, the Peloponnesian War and subsequent conflicts led to its decline as a dominant power in the ancient Greek world. I think it's somewhat similar to, we could say, England. Not necessarily the most land. They had Sparta controlled more land during the Peloponnesian War, but they controlled all the coastlines and had naval domination. So that is Athens, and there's obviously a lifetime worth more we could always study, but I hope that was a valuable primer. And now we will discuss Pisistratus, who's probably one of the less directly discussed leaders of ancient Athens. So Pisistratus, some additional information here, pardon me. Pisistratus, who lived from circa 600 to 527 BCE, was a politician in ancient Athens, ruling as tyrant in the late 560s and late 550s BCE, and from 546 BCE until his death. His unification of Attica, the triangular peninsula of Greece containing Athens, along with economic and cultural improvements, laid the groundwork for the later preeminence of Athens in ancient Greece. So despite being a tyrant, he was very significant in uniting Attica and growing its economy as likewise, and culture as well. His legacy lies primarily in his institution of the Panathenatic Games, so those games across Athens, which brought people together and created patriotism. Historically assigned the date of 566 BCE, and the consequent first attempt at producing a definitive version of the Homeric epics. Now, that is a huge achievement that perhaps if it weren't for Pisistratus, maybe we might have never had Homeric epics. So something to note. And supposedly the Trojan War was long before, so if it was only at this time that they were writing it, then maybe a lot of the information might have been not completely accurate. Pisistratus' championing of the lower class of Athens is an early example of populism as well. So there was the populist party, and then there was also the oligarch parties. So the tyrants tended to come from the populace, from the mass, not necessarily being born there, but to control or to have sway over them or have their vote. While in power, he did not hesitate to confront the aristocracy and greatly reduce their privileges, confiscating their lands and giving them to the poor. Pisistratus funded many religious and artistic programs in order to improve the economy and spread the wealth more equally among the Athenian people. So it doesn't seem all bad despite being a tyrant, but he certainly did engage in significant wealth redistribution. So Pisistratus, also known as Pisistratus, was a prominent Athenian statesman and military leader who played a significant role in the political landscape of Athens during the 6th century BCE. Therefore, we'll seek to find a biograph now, so the chronology of his life. So starting with his early life, Pisistratus was born into an aristocratic family in Athens. So interesting that he went on to rule the poorer classes, so didn't necessarily come from them. Likely around 608 BCE. His father, Hippocrates, was a member of the powerful Alcmaeonid family. Pisistratus inherited wealth and political influence, providing him with a strong foundation for his future endeavors. So maybe he was from such a powerful family that he did not need the rest of the aristocracy and sort of distanced himself from them. As for his first seizure of power in 561 BCE, Pisistratus came to power in Athens in 561 BCE, following a period of political turmoil. At this time, Athens was experiencing internal strife between different factions, and Pisistratus saw an opportunity to capitalize on the discontent among the common people. He employed a populist strategy appealing to the rural and lower class citizens. There's parallels here we see with Alcibiades, also came from the wealthier classes, but he became a populist by engaging with the lower and rural classes. As for his exile and return, Pisistratus faced opposition from rival factions in Athens, leading to his temporary exile. During his time away, he built alliances and gathered support from neighboring regions. In 556 BCE, he returned to Athens with a mercenary force and successfully seized control of the city. So, as for ostracism, or to go into exile, it was a process in ancient Athens where they would vote, and if they found someone they didn't like, they would have them banished from the city. So this happened to Pisistratus long before it later happened to Alcibiades, for example, and many other of the great or not so great of the lives highlighted in Plutarch's Parallel Lives and throughout many histories of ancient Greece. In fact, Alcibiades is also highlighted in the history of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides, so you can cross-reference Alcibiades both in Plutarch and Thucydides, which is something fascinating to do. But nonetheless, Pisistratus was exiled long before Alcibiades, but he came back with a mercenary army and seized control of the city. So maybe it wasn't best to send him off in the first place, because maybe it allowed him to get more powerful. As for his consolidation of power, during his third and final period of rule, which up to his death, Pisistratus focused on consolidating power and promoting stability in Athens. He continued his policies of land distribution and implemented other measures to strengthen the economy and divide the economy as well. Pisistratus initiated various building projects, including the construction of the temple of Olympian Zeus, king of the pantheon of gods. So he definitely went for the big one, I suppose. But then again, Athens is named after Athena, so maybe it was not the most important building project. Maybe if one were to build a temple of Athens, maybe that would be the most important. But the Acropolis is probably the greatest achievement. But perhaps to have made the first attempt at recreating them, or distributing and manifesting Homer's epics, that might even have been more of a significant achievement than all the greatest architectural achievements, perhaps. Or maybe it was less so, maybe it was equal. As for his cultural contributions, Pisistratus is credited with fostering cultural and intellectual developments in Athens, as mentioned. He supported the arts, including poetry and theater, which thrived during his rule. Pisistratus is said to have commissioned the first collection of Homeric poems, known as the Homeric hymns. So, very important achievement, a very important impact. As for his legacy, Pisistratus died in 527 BCE, and his sons Hippias and Hipparchus succeeded him in ruling Athens, also as tyrants. While Pisistratus faced opposition and periods of exile, his political acumen and populist policies left a lasting impact on Athens. He is remembered for stabilizing the city, promoting economic growth and fostering cultural achievements during his rule. It's a very, very nuanced figure because he got exiled, he went through significant hardships, but he still won the vote of the population. He did take a lot of wealth from the aristocrats, which can often be seen as bad, but he redistributed it amongst the poor and working classes. So, nuanced figure, somewhat socialist in some sense. So that is Pisistratus and the Athenian Empire, and we will discuss the leader more in the comparison, but we will now discuss the content of the slide. So title, The Athenian Empire and Pisistratus, named after Athena, goddess of wisdom, and that's also known as the birthplace of democracy and cradle of Western civilization. Significant leader, Pisistratus, Empire, Athens, period, circa 508 to 322 BCE, so that's after Cleisthenes creates the democracy, so that's after technically Pisistratus. As for the modern location, Greece, 1,000 square kilometers, 2,929. So we had been dealing with many of the empires we've covered previously in million square kilometers, quite so a little bit smaller, but that does not mean its influence was not as great, if not greater, in terms of intellectual ideas and art. As for 1,000 square miles, 1,131. That's percent of the world. It's less than 0.01%. That's excluding Antarctica. So not the hugest region, but we're also neglecting that, or I'm neglecting that it includes many areas of the sea, the Mediterranean, that they controlled over. So their land area wasn't too large, but they had control over much of the Aegean Sea, for example, or the Mediterranean more broadly. Capital city, Athens, as you may have guessed. Government was a democratic republic. Common language, Attic Greek. Religion, Greek polytheism, the pantheon of gods. Population, 250,000, of which 30,000 with civil rights as citizens. And that's approximately in the 5th century BCE. So, like a city of 250,000 is a larger city today. So I think it's quite a large city, but only 30,000 people had civil rights. They also probably were in their peak when they ruled over, or even leading up to the Peloponnesian War, they also controlled many other city-states as well, so we could increase the population too from there. But it's difficult to get a precise figure, but something larger than that. But think of Athens as 250,000 with 30,000 with civil rights. And even if they did control other city-states, those 30,000 still even had almost all the power. As for images, in the top left we have an image of Pisistratus. To the right of that, we have the owl of Athena, goddess of wisdom. Owl is the symbol of Athena. I wonder if J.K. Rowling, in giving Harry Potter an owl, had any connection with Athena. Hypothesis. To the right of that, we have a picture of the Acropolis in an 1846 painting by Leo von Klenz, who was a German painter and architect. I just thought it was particularly beautiful. If I were ever to create merchandise, I'm thinking of having great art, beautiful paintings of classical or great empires on them. So that would be something I would think of doing. Below that, we have a temple of Hephaestus, which looks brand new, it looks in great condition, but it was started construction in 449 BCE, and it was finished in 415 BCE. So it's incredibly old, and it looks in great condition, and it's beautiful. I've been to Athens, but I don't remember if I've seen the temple of Hephaestus. I have been up on the Acropolis, and it's a really beautiful site. Athens is, it is a very large city, but it's not the largest city in the world, not as large as like Tokyo or Mexico City, but standing on the Acropolis, it looks like it goes on forever, so it really feels like this center of the world when you're there. To the right of that, we have a painting of the Theater of Dionysius from the German 1891 encyclopedia edited by Joseph Kirschner. So beautiful picture of what it might have looked like, and I just think it's also a very nice drawing. And above that, we have the map of Athens on the eve of the Peloponnesian War in 431 BCE. So we can see how they control almost the entire coastline here. In red, I know it's hard to see, my apologies. The yellow is Athens, the red is Sparta. We have the Persian Empire here, still having huge Macedon, a little not noticed there, but eventually they would, after Sparta wins the war, they would have a come to lead all of these regions. And then there's Thessaly as well. Corinth was a very important region as well. So my apologies, it's small, but that is so as we can see, they really dominated the ocean and didn't necessarily have the largest area of land, but had control over the seas. So, moving to Sparta, also known as Lacedaemon. So, some quick facts to first. So, Sparta was a prominent city-state in Laconia in ancient Greece. In antiquity, the city-state was known as Lacedaemon, while the name Sparta referred to its main settlement on the banks of the Eurotas River in Laconia, in southeastern Peloponnese. Around 650 BCE, it rose to become the dominant military land power in ancient Greece. So they ruled the land, whereas Athens slowly started to get naval domination, and so Sparta was the dominant power in Greece during this time. Around 650 BCE it started, and the thing is that there's called the Thucydides trap, is that Athens started to rise, and inevitably Sparta had to stop them, otherwise they would have lost their control. Given its military preeminence, Sparta was recognized as the leading force of the unified Greek military during the Greco-Persian Wars, in rivalry with the rising naval power of Athens. But during those wars they often fought together, or mutually against the Persians. Sparta was the principal enemy of Athens during the Peloponnesian War, however, in 431 to 404 BCE, from which it emerged victorious after the Battle of Aegospotami. Pardon me for my pronunciation, but there's great imagery of this in Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. But actually, the history of the Peloponnesian War actually abruptly stops and doesn't quite finish. I'm not sure if it actually necessarily covers that war. I haven't finished it up until the end, but I'm not sure if it gets quite to that battle. The decisive battle of Leuctra against Thebes in 371 BCE ended the Spartan hegemony, although the city-state maintained its political independence until its forced integration in the Achaean League in 192 BCE. The city nevertheless recovered much autonomy after the Roman conquest of Greece in 146 BCE, and prospered during the Roman Empire, as its antiquarian customs attracted many Roman tourists. However, Sparta was sacked in 396 BCE by the Visigoths' king Alaric, and underwent a long period of decline, especially in the Middle Ages, when many of the citizens moved to Pisistratus, which is in modern Sparta, or nearby. Modern Sparta is the capital of the southern Greek region of Laconia and the center for prospering citrus and olives today. Sparta was a unique in ancient Greece for its social system and constitution, which were supposedly introduced by the semi-mythical legislator Lycurgus, one of the earliest lives in Plutarch's Parallel Lives. I highly, highly recommend one reads that. He sort of created a socialist system in ancient Sparta, and it's probably one of the earliest manifestations of that. And a very nuanced character too. Lycurgus supposedly could have had control of the state, but instead he wanted to see policies that divided the wealth and optimized the military. His laws configured the Spartan society to maximize military proficiency at all costs, focusing all social institutions on military training and physical development. The inhabitants of Sparta were stratified as Spartiates, citizens with full rights, Mothakis, who were free non-Spartiate people descended from the Spartans, and Perioikoi, who are free non-Spartiates. And as well, there's the Helots, who below them all, state-owned enslaved non-Spartan locals. Spartiate men underwent the rigorous agoge training regimen, and Spartan phalanx brigades were widely considered to be among the best in battle. Spartan women enjoyed considerably more rights than elsewhere in classical antiquity. So despite practicing eugenics, for example, and having often women's babies had to get taken away from them at a young age. Women's rights were still relatively good compared to some other city-states. Some women even went to battle. Sparta was frequently, which is not necessarily a good thing, but in terms of the equality of women and men. Men, for example, in training they had to be naked for their childhood, so it's not like they had too great of a high life, but it wasn't great for women either. What is trying to be explained here, not necessarily by me, but the information I'm trying to share, is that they were relatively more equal, but it wasn't a great lifestyle, supposedly. Sparta was frequently a subject of fascination in its own day as well as in Western culture, following the revival of classical learning. The admiration of Sparta is well known as laconophilia. Bertrand Russell wrote, a great philosopher, Sparta had a double effect on Greek thought, through the reality and through the myth. The reality enabled the Spartans to defeat Athens in war. The myth influenced Plato's political theory and that of countless subsequent writers. The ideals that it favors had a great part in framing the doctrines of Rousseau, Nietzsche, and National Socialism. So, National Socialism, became Nazism. But it were some of the earliest thinkers of socialism. And according to Rousseau, one could link this laconophilia with Rousseau, who's, the social contract is not too crazy. I think most people agree with many of the things in there, but not everything. Nietzsche is a bit more radical, but not quite insane. But he advocated some interesting things, and particularly thus spake Zarathustra, as far as I know. And then National Socialism is quite a bit more extreme even. So, as for the specific shape, the rise and fall, so the history of Sparta, one of the prominent city-states in ancient Greece, is marked by its military prowess, distinctive social structure, and significant role in the Peloponnesian Wars. Here, therefore, we'll seek to find a history of its chronology of rise and fall. So starting with the rise of Sparta, founding and early years. Sparta was founded around the 10th century BCE in the region of Laconia in the southern Peloponnese. According to legend, it was established by the descendants of Hercules, or Heracles. A very important figure, so he was Dorian. So something that's mentioned in the Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian Wars, that the Spartans were Dorians and the Athenians were Ionians. So they were different races, technically, and spoke different languages. But Thucydides does make a note, which kind of was in the back of my head already. It was like, was this a war between different races? But he said, no, it wasn't that, because some Ionians allied themselves with the Spartans, and some Dorians allied themselves with Athens. So it wasn't necessarily two races going against each other, more so just two states going against each other. So an important distinction that Thucydides cared to mention, because it was something that I had thought of. As for the rise of Sparta, the founding in early years. Sparta was founded, we already said that. As for the constitution of Lycurgus, so it was founded by the Dorian descendants of Heracles, supposedly. As for the constitution of Lycurgus, in the 8th century BCE, the legendary figure Lycurgus is credited with formulating the constitution that shaped Spartan society. Supposedly he had an offer to become king himself, but instead he disappeared and then wrote a constitution and never took the powers necessarily himself, and disappeared later. This constitution, known as the Great Retra, emphasized military training, communal living, and a rigid structure. It's very sharing the wealth. They were not even allowed to, for example, use foreign currencies, and often no currencies at all in many situations. As for military excellence, Sparta became known for its exceptional military training from a young age. So they would take kids, they would be training in the agoge, they had no clothes to toughen up their skin. The agoge, an education and training system aimed to produce skilled and disciplined soldiers, emphasizing physical fitness, endurance, and combative skills. As the Peloponnesian League, Sparta emerged as a dominant force in the Peloponnesian region and led the Peloponnesian League, a coalition of city-states that included Corinth, Elis, and others. Sparta's military might and leadership were especially evident in the Greco-Persian wars in the early 5th century BCE, as we will mention more with Leonidas, for example, the first. As for the golden age of Sparta, it's the victory in the Peloponnesian War in 431 to 404 BCE. Sparta played a significant war in the Peloponnesian War against Athens. The war resulted in Spartan victory, but it also left the city weakened due to casualties and internal strife. So it definitely cost them a lot to go to battle with Athens, but they did ultimately win. There's a term, a Pyrrhic victory. I would not call this a Pyrrhic victory, but Pyrrhus was a Roman general, and I would quote the Pyrrhic victory as a costly victory. So, but this was not. It was a costly, prolonged war. Maybe all wars are prolonged or costly. But I just wanted to reference Pyrrhus, which I hope you endeavor to check out that episode. And if you have, thank you very much. As for the fall of Sparta, the Battle of Leuctra from 371 BCE. The decline of Sparta became pronounced after its defeat by Thebes at the Battle of Leuctra. The Theban general Epaminondas introduced innovative military tactics. He's actually one of the missing of Plutarch's parallel lives, so it's interesting. So perhaps he might be one I'd like to biograph, including the use of the deep phalanx, which countered Sparta's traditional tactics. As for the Theban hegemony, the defeat of Leuctra marked the end of Spartan military dominance, and Thebes assumed a position of hegemony in Greece. This period saw the decline of Spartan power and influence. As for the Battle of Mantinea in 362 BCE, Sparta faced another defeat at the Battle of Mantinea, further diminishing its influence in the Greek world. As for the Macedonian conquest, Sparta fell under the control of Philip II of Macedon in the mid-4th century BCE. It's covered in the Macedonian Empire, covered Philip II. The rise of Alexander the Great solidified Macedonian dominance in Greece, including Sparta. Alexander the Great, the famous son of Philip II of Macedon. As for the legacy of Sparta, Sparta's legacy is largely defined by its military discipline, distinctive social structure, and contributions to ancient Greek history. While its political and military influence declined over time, the cultural and military practices of Sparta continued to influence later societies and military thinkers throughout history, according to Bertrand Russell, that being Rousseau, Nietzsche, and National Socialism. So, as for Leonidas the First, important leader, I wanted to find a leader that wasn't highlighted in Plutarch's Parallel Lives, so we're not going to discuss Lycurgus here. We'll discuss Leonidas the First, who is a leader you might already know of. He was featured in the movie 300, for example. So Leonidas the First was we don't know necessarily when he was born, but he did die on the 19th of September 480 BCE, precise date. Was a king of ancient Greek city-state Sparta, and in the 17th of the Aegeid line, a dynasty which claimed descent from the mythical demigod Hercules, so directly descended supposedly from Hercules himself, which was a big part of the Spartan heritage. Leonidas I was a son of King Anaxandridas II. He succeeded his half-brother, King Cleomenes the First, to the throne circa 489 BCE. His co-ruler was King Leotychidas, and he was succeeded by his son, King Pisistratus. So, something I note here, to get a throne from a brother rather than a father might have a different feel. I think to see one's brother, one could see their follies and see their successes, whereas to receive it from one's father, one might not view them as critically. So just something I'm hypothesizing. Another thing to note is that in ancient Sparta, it was a diarchy, so there would be two kings at the same time. So that would also be somewhat humbling, I would think, if not tempting to gain more power, but at least it didn't seem to be. They didn't quite have a problem with tyrants as there was in Athens, who became populist people from the lower classes, often supporting one leader to have too much power, whereas in Sparta it was always two kings sort of balancing the power. So not necessarily one system better than the other, but interesting to note. At the Second Greco-Persian War, Leonidas led the allied Greek forces in a last stand at the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE, attempting to defend the pass from the invading Persian army, and was killed early in the battle. Leonidas entered myth as a hero and the leader of the 300 Spartans. While the Greeks lost this battle, they were able to expel the Persian invaders in the following year with the help of Athens. So, very important leader. I hope you, if you're old enough, you watch the movie 300. It's maybe the storyline is quite quick, but you can kind of get a feel for how militaristic they were. So, as for some more detail of his chronology, so while Leonidas the First of Sparta is a historical figure renowned for his role in the Battle of Thermopylae, detailed information about his life is unfortunately limited. Much of what is known revolves around his military leadership during the crucial event in ancient Greek history. Therefore, we seek to find a biography of his life. So his early life, Leonidas was born circa 540 BCE into the Aegead royal family of Sparta. As a member of the Aegead dynasty, Leonidas belonged to one of the two royal families that alternately occupied the throne of Sparta, and it's a diarchy. As for his ascension to the throne, Leonidas became king of Sparta around 489 BCE. So that would make him in his close to his 50s. And he succeeded his half-brother Cleomenes I. Spartan kingship was hereditary, and Leonidas took on the responsibilities of a dual monarchy, sharing the power with his co-king from the Europontid family. But if he has, I think both sides had connections to Hercules, but nonetheless his lineage was quite definitively linked to Hercules, which is important to note. As for his preparation for the Persian invasion, around 490 BCE, Sparta was faced with a threat of invasion by the Persian Empire under King Darius I, as well as Xerxes earlier. Leonidas led a small force of Spartans to aid the Greek city-states in the Battle of Marathon. However, due to religious reasons, the Spartans arrived at the battle, and at the time the battle had concluded, so they missed the Battle of Marathon. But they showed up significantly in the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE. Leonidas is best known for his leadership in the Battle of Thermopylae during the Greco-Persian Wars. In 480 BCE, King Xerxes I of Persia invaded Greece with a massive army. Leonidas, with a small contingent of Spartans and other Greek allies, defended the narrow pass of Thermopylae to block the Persian advance. Pardon me, it's Cyrus is before Darius. Xerxes is after Darius. My apologies, correction. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Leonidas and his forces held their ground for several days, with only 300 Spartan soldiers, trained since youth. Their heroic stand allowed the rest of the Greek forces to prepare for the larger battle to come, namely the Athenians. Ultimately, the Persians found a mountain path that bypassed the defenders, leading to the defeat of the Greeks, and Leonidas I died in battle, so he was king and he put himself in that much harm's way, which shows significant courage. As for the death at Thermopylae, Leonidas and the Spartans fought bravely to the end. In the final stage of the battle, Leonidas was killed, and his death became a symbol of Spartan valor and sacrifice. His legacy, thus, Leonidas' legacy is largely associated with the battle at Thermopylae. His sacrifice and courage displayed by the Spartans in the battle have been celebrated in literature, art, and popular culture. The Battle of Thermopylae is often remembered as a symbol of Greek city-states' determination to resist the Persian invasion. So that is the fascinating and important life of Leonidas I. So to discuss the content of the slide, titled The Spartan Empire and Leonidas I. Settlement on the banks of the Eurotas River that became the dominant Greek military power, at least particularly in the land, and then they also defeated the Athenians as well, also known as Lacedaemon. Significant leader, Leonidas I, Empire, Sparta, period 900s to 192 BCE, modern location, Greece, 1,000 square kilometers, 3,584, 1,000 square miles, 1,383%, of the world, less than 0.01%, excluding Antarctica. So quite a bit smaller than many of the empires we've covered, but many people know much more about Sparta than they do many of the other empires we've covered, so go figure. But nonetheless, their area of land wasn't particularly large, but they exerted force over a large area of the region. For example, they could have other states do things for them if they asked, because they were the more powerful city-state in the southern Peloponnese, at least until the rise of Athens, which they ultimately shut down. As for the capital, Sparta, as one might guess, government diarchy led by 2 kings, common languages Doric Greek, so different, not Attic Greek or from the Ionian Greek, so Doric Greek is different. Religion, Greek polytheism, so they did have the same religion. So there's in the Federalist Papers, it's noted that it's even the Greek peoples who were united by a common enemy and shared the same religion, it was not sufficient to hold them together. So they needed to have a union rather than a confederation, is the argument, and thus advocating for the United States of America rather than a looser confederation. Population 20,000 to 35,000, but still a small number. But if we think that Athens, as we saw in the previous slide and previous discussion, Athens had about 30,000 citizens, so pretty close in the number of the actual citizens, and that excludes helots. So the population, maybe we add another 200,000. It's pretty close in terms of population to Athens, but like Athens, they also both had many. Sparta had many slaves, so it could even be in the millions, but I doubt it was that high, but it could be a couple 100,000, 300,000, but nonetheless, their populations was, I would presume, slightly larger than Athens. But Athens had many states that it captured around particularly the coastline, which must be included, who were not necessarily citizens, but not fully slaves all the time. They were often tributaries, whereas Sparta had more official slaves, helots. But they also did have other forms of vassals as well. So in terms of images, in the top left we have an image of Leonidas the First with a famous helmet with the broom-like helmet. I actually got one of those when I went to ancient Greece, so it almost looks like that one. So maybe I'll bring that out someday. To the right of that, we have an image of Lycurgus, the ancient lawgiver of Sparta, very significant in establishing everything, all the laws of what Athens came to be, and influencing many different philosophies in the future, such as Rousseau, Nietzsche, and National Socialism, according to Bertrand Russell. To the right of that, we have an image of a medieval depiction of Sparta from the Nuremberg Chronicle, made in 1493. So not saying that's necessarily what Sparta looked like, but that's what the medieval people thought it might have looked like. Below that, we have a very important image, the Selection of Children in Sparta, painting in 1785 by Jean-Pierre Saint-Ours, a Swiss painter from Geneva. So what this was, as under Lycurgus's great retro, they would practice eugenics. So if there was a kid that wasn't fit for to be a citizen or wasn't fit for the military, they would get rid of them. So here we have a man showing his kid to the council to have it reviewed, and as we can see, there's another person obviously quite forlorn or lamenting. Probably he got his child taken away. So very, very tough and very fascinating, beautiful painting, I think. So obviously sad, but in terms of the amount of emotion, one can only fathom what that would feel like. To the right of that, we have also an old map of what the city might have looked like. So the citadel in the front, in the center, as we can see, doesn't look like there are too many buildings near it, but there were different tribes centered around the citadel, and in the tribes they would have agoge and they would train for military there. And in the top right, we have the same map that we had on the Athens slide, where we can see right before, in 431 BCE, the land Sparta owned, probably more land technically, but I think actually in terms of the numbers, Athens actually may have controlled more at its peak, but I think because Athens eventually defeated them, it had to have been larger. Yeah, pardon me, Sparta was definitely had more land, even at the time of the battle. And nonetheless, they did win. But as we can see, Athens controlled the ocean, or the Mediterranean Sea. And yeah, but the Mediterranean does connect to the ocean, but but it's a sea, it's saltwater. Now to the comparison in the style of Plutarch's parallel lives. So sometimes it's forced with Plutarch, sometimes they're quite different. I think these two leaders are quite different, but nonetheless we will see what we can learn about them and maybe see whom you might prefer to follow, and myself as well. So Pisistratus of Athens and Leonidas I of Sparta were significant figures in ancient Greek history, but they played very different roles and lived in different periods. Therefore, we seek to find a comparison of the two to learn a bit more about them and their respective empires. So their background and rise to power. Pisistratus, circa 608 to 527 BCE in Athens. Pisistratus came from an aristocratic background, being born in the Alcmaeonid family. He first seized power in Athens in 561 BCE through populist strategies appealing to the lower classes. So, quite a unique way. Oh, well, not unique necessarily for populists, as we'll see in Plutarch's Parallel Lives or my Ancient Greek and Roman History series. Alcibiades came from the wealthy class and then was a populist amongst the lower classes. So, and likely replicated even today in modern society too, and throughout history, as we'll see with other empires. As for Leonidas I, circa 540 to 480 BCE, 540 to 480 BCE in Sparta, Leonidas belonged to the Aegead royal family of Sparta and inherited the throne. So he was actually inherited a kingship, or part of diarchy, one of the two kings. So Pisistratus did come from a wealthy aristocratic family, but not quite at the level of Leonidas I. Leonidas was a king, a descendant of a king, and he has lineage all the way back to Hercules. His rise to power was part of the Spartan dual monarchy, where kingship altered between two royal families, the Aegeads and the Euriponids. So they both did come from pretty good backgrounds, but Pisistratus sort of had to take his tyranny, whereas Leonidas I was more necessarily granted. As for their leadership style, Pisistratus ruled Athens as a tyrant during different periods of his life. So he came in and out. He got exiled, came back with a mercenary force, and came to rule it again up until his death. Despite the negative connotations of tyrant today, Pisistratus' rule was characterized by a level of popularity among the common people. So tyrant often sounds bad, but the people certainly liked him. And he implemented policies that benefited the lower classes, such as asset redistribution, taking money from the aristocrats and land, which is something that had already happened many, many years before by Lycurgus in Sparta. So Sparta had already taken most of the wealth from the aristocrats. The only difference really between an aristocrat or a citizen in Sparta was that they eventually had government roles, but they just had to go to war like everybody else. As for Leonidas I, he was king of Sparta during a period when Sparta was known for its dual monarchy and oligarchic political structure. He is best known for his military leadership, particularly during the Battle of Thermopylae, where he demonstrated exceptional bravery and commitment to defending Greece against the Persian invasion. So they were both, however, very brave. Or maybe Pisistratus was maybe brave for his own ambitions, whereas Leonidas I was brave to put his own life at risk to expel the Persians, and for the good of all Greece, perhaps even. As for contributions to their cities, Pisistratus is remembered for his policies that benefited the common people of Athens, including land redistribution. He supported cultural and artistic endeavors, commissioning the first collection of Homeric poems, very important contribution to the arts, so not so bad of a tyrant we're starting to see, but obviously he did seize control through a coup. As for Leonidas I, or even with a mercenary army later too, as for Leonidas I, he is celebrated for his heroic stand at the Battle of Thermopylae, where he fought alongside a small force of Spartans, 300 only, against an overwhelming Persian force. His sacrifice became a symbol of Spartan valor and is often remembered in the context of the larger Greco-Persian wars. So no huge contribution to the arts. Athens was really the capital of the arts, far beyond. Sparta was not concerned in that area. They were more focused on battle, so probably their soldiers were necessarily each one a little bit better on average, but they had no arts really at all, whereas in Pisistratus' time they were developing Homeric epics and theaters and such. So where would you rather live? But Athens also had tyrants who would take control, steal wealth from the aristocrats. So they're both different tough places to live. But Leonidas is remembered as a martyr. He died in battle, which Pisistratus is seen. His death is sort of considered a good thing, the defeat of a tyrant. As for their legacy, Pisistratus' legacy is mixed. While he is remembered for some populist policies, his rule is associated with the concept of tyranny in Athens, and his descendants were also tyrants. As for Leonidas, the first Leonidas' legacy is one of heroism and sacrifice. His role in the Battle of Thermopylae is a central part of the broader narrative of Greek resistance against Persian invasion. So, generally more positive image, but maybe he did fewer things. But, or maybe just the fewer things are, the things he did are not as documented as Pisistratus. Thus, while both figures were significant in the context of their respective city-states, their roles, methods of leadership, and contexts in which they lived were quite different. Pisistratus is remembered for his political rule in Athens, while Leonidas is revered for his military leadership in Sparta during a critical moment in Greek history. So I think there's much we can learn from both of them, and much more we can learn as well. But I think if we take sort of the best aspects of each of them, one can get rid of the bad things they did. Leonidas, the first, isn't recognized as having anything bad. Maybe just by him being a king, one might consider that bad, but it was kind of given to him. It wasn't necessarily his duty to give it up. That was something that no one had ever done. So, but nonetheless, Pisistratus took power. But he was a populist too, and asset redistribution isn't always bad. So there's got to be some level of tax, one might say. So that is Ages of Empires, where we covered ancient Sparta and ancient Athens, and as well Pisistratus and Leonidas, and a comparison at the end. So thank you very much. This is Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. I'm very grateful for your support, and I hope you continue to do so. Thank you very much.